You think China's biggest threat is the US Navy? Wrong. China's biggest threat is a dot on the map. 100 feet of steel, a supertanker, and a strip of water so narrow you could swim across it. Nobody noticed that 40% of global trade passes through a channel narrower than the length of 3 football fields. Nobody noticed that 80% of China's oil, the blood in the veins of the world's second-largest economy, flows through a passage China does not control. Nobody noticed that Singapore, a city-state with fewer people than Beijing's Haidian district, holds the key to China's survival. Nobody noticed the Malacca dilemma. 500 miles long, 1.7 miles wide at its narrowest. Indonesia on one side, Malaysia on the other, Singapore at the throat. This is not just a shipping lane. This is the maritime security flashpoint the world forgot about. The Panama Canal moves 6% of global trade. The Suez Canal handles 12%. The Strait of Malacca, 40%. Every flat-screen television, every lithium battery, every barrel of crude oil destined for East Asia, all of it funnels through this one corridor. And the country that needs it most? China. China consumes 14 million barrels of oil every day. It produces 4 million. The gap, 10 million barrels arrives by ship. And the shortest route from the Middle Eastern oil fields to Chinese refineries? The Strait of Malacca. Chinese strategists have a name for this. Hu Jintao, former president, called it the Malacca dilemma. His exact words, the Malacca problem. Because here's the math no one wants to voice out loud. The US Navy's 7th Fleet operates out of Singapore. India's Andaman and Nicobar Command sits at the strait's western entrance. Australia, Japan, the United Kingdom all maintain naval presence in Southeast Asia. Every supertanker heading to Shanghai passes through a corridor surrounded by US allies. One blockade, one crisis, 1 week, and the lights go out in Beijing. Let that settle. China built the largest manufacturing economy in human history on a foundation it doesn't own. The factory of the world runs on oil shipped through a channel patrolled by its rivals. This is not a hypothetical. This is the everyday reality of Chinese energy security. So Beijing did what Beijing always does. It started digging. 4 projects, hundreds of billions of dollars, all designed to answer one question: what if Malacca closes? Route 1. CPEC, the Pakistan corridor. China is building a highway, a railway, and a pipeline from the Arabian Sea through Pakistan into western China. Gwadar port sits outside the Strait of Hormuz. Oil arrives, flows through the desert, bypasses Malacca entirely. Cost: $62 billion. Problem: Balochistan is unstable. Separatists have attacked Chinese workers. The terrain is among the most hostile on Earth. And Pakistan's relationship with Beijing? Complicated. Route 2. The Myanmar pipeline. Oil lands at Kyaukphyu on Myanmar's coast. Pipeline runs 771 kilometers into Yunnan province. Operational since 2017. Problem: the pipeline cuts through territory controlled by ethnic armed groups who owe nothing to Beijing. Route 3. The Kra Canal, the dream that won't die. Cut through Thailand's narrow isthmus of Kra. Ships skip Malacca entirely. The proposal has existed since 1677. Thailand has never built it. Every time a Chinese delegation visits Bangkok, the canal is rumored. Every time they leave, the canal is shelved. Cost: $28 billion. Time: 10 years. Route 4. The Northern Sea Route. Arctic ice. Russian cooperation. As the ice melts, the route opens. Shanghai to Rotterdam, 40% shorter than Malacca. But it's only navigable 4 months a year. Not a solution, a bet on climate catastrophe. Here's the part nobody talks about. The US Navy doesn't patrol the Strait of Malacca because it wants to blockade China. It patrols the strait because the global economy runs on free passage. But that distinction between protection and control collapses the moment tensions escalate. Taiwan, South China Sea. A miscalculation. And suddenly the Strait of Malacca is not a shipping lane, it's a weapon. Singapore knows this. That's why it has spent 60 years building the most advanced navy in Southeast Asia for a country smaller than New York City. That's why Malaysia and Indonesia, after decades of maritime disputes, are suddenly coordinating patrols. Everyone sees the game. Nobody speaks its name. China's escape routes are expensive, slow, fragile. But they're real, and they're advancing. The Kra Canal may never be built, but the Myanmar pipeline already exists. CPEC is operational. The Northern Sea route opens wider every year. So here's the question nobody is asking. What happens when the world doesn't need the Strait of Malacca anymore? What happens to Singapore, a city built on transit, when the transit stops? What happens to Malaysia and Indonesia, nations that collect billions in port fees when the tankers take a different route? What happens to the global order built on a geography that is quietly becoming obsolete? The Malacca dilemma is not China's problem. It's everyone's problem, and nobody noticed. The world runs on corridors of power most people can't find on a map. That's why you're here. That's why this channel exists. If you want to see what others miss, subscribe. The next corridor is even more dangerous.